All right, welcome everybody. I'm not going to do a big bio, John. I think everyone knows you well, but we're so happy to have our own Reverend John Talbert here today. This is building on our last forum, I believe, and just adding a theological perspective for social action. So, welcome, John.
Thank you, Bill. Well, I hope you're clapping for yourselves because I hope this will end up being a conversation. That's my dream of this. I think we are in a time of uncertainty. When I first started working on what I was going to say today, I made the mistake of sending it to my son and he said, I used the language, we're in a time of crisis. And David says, no, it's not a time of crisis. A crisis is a heart attack, or the house is on fire, or there is a tornado. So I changed it to a time of uncertainty because I think what we are in is in a time where it's not a crisis, because in a crisis, you can only react. And so in a time of uncertainty, we need to be able to act. So I think this is the time we need to take action. And so when I was asked to do this, I thought, okay, well, that will be fun because I really believe that biblical language is political language. And I've actually said that in one of my sermons here at St. John's. And so I started thinking about what I was going to say. And I started looking through the scriptures, both Old Testament, New Testament. I picked out a book I had in my library of Martin Luther King's biography, and even picked up a book by Andrew Young that he had given me years ago that was his autobiography, and started reading what these people said. And after all of this reading, and I was trying to write, and when all else fails, then you pray. I said, God, I don't know what I'm doing here. Help. And I was given a vision. I took my granddaughter, Brooklyn, to tennis practice several weeks ago. And for the first 12 minutes, they didn't pick up the racket. They ran around the court and then did various foot exercises. And then they picked up their rackets. And for the next 15 minutes, they had a partner that hit dead balls to them, that they would move to one side to get the right footwork to hit a forehand, and the other side to get the right footwork to hit a backhand. So for 27 minutes, there was no tennis being played. It was all about footwork. So when you're learning something new, or in times of uncertainty, go back to basics. What are our theological Christian basics for living life in the world? How do we live together in this country? What would Jesus do? That's always a good question. Well, my impression of what Jesus would do is Jesus would ask us a question or tell us a story that we were supposed to figure out what we were supposed to do. So what is it that informed what Jesus did and how Jesus acted in the world? Where did his wisdom come from? It came from his relationship with God and from his reading of the scriptures. And when we talk about the scriptures that Jesus read, it's the Hebrew scriptures. It's the Old Testament. So where do we go? What are the fundamentals? I think it's the Ten Commandments. Now, I don't want the Ten Commandments hanging on the wall in all of our classrooms, but the Ten Commandments are really the basis of the Judeo-Christian value system. They are much richer than plaques on a wall that are just rules you're supposed to follow. But the Ten Commandments really talk about what the vision is of community and what the values are of community. So let's look at the way they probably were originally stated, that they were very concise and to the point. Now, Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, to me, those are sort of expansions on what the original commandments were that were very much. But the Ten Commandments were looking at, when you look at the negatives of the Ten Commandments, so I want to start by looking at the 4th through the 10th commandment. When you look at the negatives of those, the thou shalt nots, that it's what destroys community. What destroys community is when people are afraid of living, they're afraid of being murdered, they can't, there's no honoring of anybody, there's stealing, there's no truth being told, and people are not secure in what they are. So to me, the Ten Commandments, they form what is sustainable about community. And I think there are two deep values that are implied in that. One is that I think we are intended, life is intended to be lived in community. And the second is to live in community. Each individual has to sacrifice something of themselves. So the values that are implicit in living in community is it benefits everybody in community. And it takes cooperation to live in community. One person can't just do what they want to do. You have to be able to cooperate. And it also means community is something that is sustained over multiple generations. The values of human life are more than work to sustain oneself, and community is bigger than any individual. So I want to look at each one of these commandments, starting with the 4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, certainly, it is part of remembering God, that everything we have comes from God, and it's not just for but I think also remembering the Sabbath day to keep it holy was about work and about labor. Everybody deserves time off. This keeps people at the top from abusing people at the bottom, because wherever you are on the social scale, you deserve time off, time from work, time off from labor. So the 5th commandment, honor your father and your mother. The basic unit of community, the DNA of community, is the family. That's the basic unit of cooperation. And I love what Lisa has done in terms of the slide she's brought up. It's the place where we learn self-control and sacrificing, and what it means to share and to be loyal to each other. It's where we learn to serve one another, where we pray, work, and love. So family is the basic unit of community. Family is also the vision of multiple generations. And so the next slide is about honoring your father and mother. Because when we honor our father and mother, it doesn't mean just to take care of them. It means when we get too old, and I'm one of those, that we will be taken care of by our children. In other words, the value of human life is not just what we can produce. It's about who we are. When we no longer are productive and are able to sustain ourselves, then others in the community will step in and do that for us. So the next one is murder. And notice the Hebrew word that is used, as opposed to what the King James says, thou shalt not kill, is you shall not commit murder. Murder is a deliberate act of taking another's life. It's an unjust act. And of course, we can't sustain community when you see everybody else as a potential enemy, and you have to constantly protect yourself. You shall not commit adultery. As the family is the basic unit of community, it's also the basic unit of economics. It's the basic unit of people being able to do things in the world to sustain one another. And so committing adultery is, in a sense, of, stealing another person's business partner and thereby destroying the basic unit of community. And so certainly adultery has to do with, to me, to do with more than just a sexual act. It has to do with, again, destroying community. Thou shalt not steal. We can't sustain community if what you have is not secure. And if people can take what you have, including your freedom, that's what stealing is about. And then finally, you shall not bear false witness. Well, not finally, but the ninth is you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Bearing false witness is lying about somebody or lying to somebody. If you can't depend upon people that you're in community with to tell you the truth, or people are saying things about you that are not true, that is what destroys community. So truth is one of the essence of the way we sustain community. And then Lisa, finally, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. This was the original commandment. Then both Deuteronomy and Exodus added to that with a whole list of other things. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or your donkey or whatever else that is added to that. In other words, coveting means not just, that's a nice shirt you have on. I would like one like it. No, I want your shirt. I want me to have your shirt and you not to have the shirt. That's what coveting really is about. So I've left commandments 1, 2, and 3 till the end because our Judeo-Christian values depend upon these three. Now, we assume that God gives these commandments, and the first commandment says, "You shall have no other gods besides me." Now, think, it doesn't say there are no other gods. It says, "You shall have no other gods besides me." Think of the gods that we worship in the world. It's always been strange to me that on all of our currency, it says, "In God we trust." And I think, what is that really about? Is that about God? Or is that about what that's written on? What are the other gods? What are some of the other gods? Tell me. Yeah. Power. Yeah. What? Yeah. 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 Flesh. Yeah. There are many other gods. You shall have no other God beside me. And the second one, you shall not make any likeness. To me, this probably is one of the commandments that is most often misused. Because when it says you shall not make any likeness, what I think that really means is that when we assume that we know what God's plan is, when we assume that we know God tells us what to do, and what we are doing is because God has told us that, I think we're way off base because we really know nothing about God except to trust God. What we can assume that since the commandments are given by God, that we can trust God to do commandments 4 through 10, which have a lot of grace and a lot of feeling and community. And so we can trust God to do that. But other than trusting God, to be able to make claims about God, which often we do, I think is what that commandment is about. And finally, the third commandment is you shall not take the name of your Lord your God in vain. God won't be used. God won't be mocked. And when we use God for our own purposes, I think that's exactly what we're doing, is mocking God. So these, to me, are what our basic Christian values are. This is looking back at getting the steps right of what it is that informs us about community. And Jesus also talked not only about the law, he often talked about the prophets. He said, the law and the prophets. The prophets were not soothsayers. They were not people who predicted the future. Richard Rohr, in a little new book he has written on the biblical prophets, says the Judeo religion, the Hebrew religion, as far as he can find, is the only one who instituted within itself a role of a critic. That's what the prophets were. They were critics. They were first critics to speak truth to power. One of the first prophets that we remember is Nathan with the story of David and Bathsheba. And when Nathan comes to David after he's taken Uriah's wife and tells this story to him, and he says, "Oh, that person should be uh, done away with." And Nathan says, "You are the man, because that's what you did." So the first prophet was one who was critical of speaking truth to power. But then we come along to look at the later prophets, the so-called literary prophets, the one whose names are attached to books, and it's about the community. So the prophets not only speak truth to power, they speak truth to the people also. In other words, we just might be a part of the problem. And I think that's one of the things that we seem to lack in our country today is the ability of self-criticism. Most of us have a very difficult time personally of being self-critical of what we're doing. We all like to assume we're good people and we do the right thing. My wife is one of my prophets, unfortunately, and many of our conflicts take place over one of us criticizing the other, and yet that is a necessary role. Well, when you look at how we are as individuals and we resist self-criticism, I think the institutions of power have almost no ability to self-criticize. And in some sense, our country recognizes that in the way it was set up in terms of trying to build in self-criticism into the government. But when government doesn't want to be criticized, then it tries to do away with that prophetic voice. So what I would like to do at this point is to shift the conversation from me talking to us talking. And what I want to do is, for a few minutes, is if you will turn to a person next to you, or either one person or three of you turn together, and you may have to move your chairs. I want us to look at these four questions. And you can pick out any one you want to pick out. That's why I tried to get four different questions that would be able to engage this conversation about what is our role as a Christian, looking at our Christian values and where they come from. What is our role in society? Because I think that's what politics is about, is what is our role in society. I think in many ways, as I look at the situation we're in today, that we not only have been complacent, assuming somebody is going to take care of all of this mess, but one of the reasons we become complacent is I think we're also complicit in this. And this is where the self-criticism, I think, is so valuable. So if you will turn to somebody, and let's take about 10 minutes of doing this. Pick out one of the questions or more than one of the questions you want to look at. And then I want to bring us back together and let's talk in terms of the larger group. Did that make sense? Well, Okay, if I could get people to, let's have your attention back in this direction. And I love the way you're resisting power. That shows you have been listening. Well, it either shows how little power I do have. What I would like to do for the few minutes we have left is I would really like somebody from each one of the little gatherings to be able to say what your group talked about or insights you might have had. And then we will open this up to discussion both online with our friends who are online as well as us. So we have two mics here. So if somebody from each group would be willing to just sort of report on your group in terms of that. You can see all of the introverts pointing toward the extrovert in the group of who's going to. Oh, well, we would, looking at that group, we would know who has the mic in that group. Howard.
Well, we focused on question 4, on what can Christians do about the situation with people that you don't agree with. And one of the key points that Tom came up with, I think, was don't despair. Don't despair. Don't give up and think things are hopeless. That's a starting point. And then we discussed the idea of community, which, seems to me, I've myself done a bit of a study on this recently, but what held American society for 250 years almost, what had held it together, what principles? It wasn't some, democratic ideology or Republican ideology or anything. And the very first thing I came up with, independently of what you talked about today, John, was community, was that somehow we manage to preserve the community as an important value. And I gave a kind of a bizarre example of Nixon in 1960 did not contest what was actually a pretty decent case he had, that he had been cheated out of the presidency. It was an extremely close election, and it was Chicago and the mob and everything. And he was pressed to make an issue out of that and put the whole thing up. And he said, no, that would destroy the community. That would, in essence, that's what he said. And here's the guy that is not held up as one of our best presidents by any stretch.
Right.
And yet even he recognized that there was this boundary and that's what's in danger of being lost.
Yeah.
But in the first instance, it's don't wait for a Messiah to come and save you and be passive, and don't despair. And that's the starting point.
Thank you.
Our group, John, Kathy, and I, focused on question 3 because we wanted to look at what each of us as Christians, as individuals, could do to make a difference, because that puts the burden where it belongs on each of us. And we had a good, robust discussion about individual actions that have been, that are part of our lives, where we try to treat other people as we would have them treat us. But of course, we had Mr. Nourishing Bethesda here, so he had a larger community that he could refer to. And as we talked, we started to veer towards not individual acts alone, but what's the common theme, the principle that underlies those actions? Because if you view it as an individual action, when I've done it, I'm done. But if you view it as a principle in which the action is a manifestation of it, we're never done. And the thought was that I'm sure many could come up with a better word or a better concept, but we came up with respect for everyone, not just ourselves, our local community, the people that we like within our community, but respect for all. Because if you view everyone as a person that you should respect, you then can deal with a larger picture, but from an individual perspective. And we talked about various things that would fit within that mantra. The example might be, well, I disagree with a whole lot of people about um, the political life of this country. But if I respect the person that I disagree with, I have a different dialogue. I'm not trying to beat them down. I'm not trying to convince them they're wrong. I'm trying to find a shared ground on which we can show mutual respect. So instead of trying to say, you know, the position you're taking on this issue does so much harm and mine is better, you might say, is this an action? The principle, is this a position that has some roots somewhere? Would you agree that what we want to do within a prudent way is helping each other, helping thy neighbor? Does your position better serve that? Does mine, or maybe a third position, which we could work together to achieve? Again, a respectful tone, looking for a common ground on an individual basis. The thinking was shows respect, and respect should never be out of popularity.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
Denise and I had a conversation about Christianity and our government. And we both felt that religion and government need to be separate because we feel like in the name of God, I can do anything. And we felt that was really taking the wrong attitude and the wrong end of the stick. Mr. Jefferson had a very good idea when he wanted to separate church and state. And I still feel firmly that that must be the case. That does not mean we cannot individually go and march. We cannot individually speak out, but it will be taken over by somebody who might not have the same point of view and want to exploit religious or Christianity as such.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Banthan. So our group talked about, we focused on the first question, and we talked about how community, the support of community is also reflected in our Constitution and is consistent with the Ten Commandments. We have legal rights and so forth that support our community and prevent it from being torn apart, arbitrarily, and how today we see, a breakdown of that in the seizure of immigrants, pulling them out of our community. We talked about the Truth and Reconciliation Committee's process in South Africa and how that was a really amazing episode of preserving the community in the face of huge change and possible retribution, which did not happen. And we talked about how we believe, although we're not experts in other religions, we believe other religions are similar to the Christian Judeo religion in supporting community, and that this is not unique. It may have some special unique features, but most religions support values that support our community, and we're not seeing that right now in our country.
Right.
Oh, okay. All right. So Liz and I talked really kind of about all four questions, but we sort of got into a conversation about prophetic voices in a way, which is, are we hearing other voices that might actually have a message for us? In our community, we're in a bit of a bubble. We all think relatively similarly, whether it's here in this church or outside in our local communities. But there are issues that clearly are bothering part of this country, half this country, in a very serious way that we feel is threatening. But it's a little bit like Earl was talking about, listening with respect and potentially finding there may be some prophetic voice out there that we didn't actually ever realize before. And I think for our Judeo-Christian values, unless we accept a little bit of humility, that not everything we think is the right way or the right solution or maybe even the right problem, we probably are going to remain stuck in this situation, and we're all losing for it. And so from our perspective, it is really to be a bit more outward leaning. And we think we are outward leaning, but it actually excludes part of this country.
Thank you.
For my sins, I've been asked to speak for my group. So we focus primarily on the third question, and the fact that acts make a big difference. Acts of faith, acts of supporting your community, acts like many of us have tried to do in this church, but to broaden that, not just to keep it within the church itself. And I mentioned one of my favorite quotes is the former chief rabbi of Britain, who said, you know, don't you think God is big enough to have many paths to him? And, you know, I think that's where we need to think about those common threads in our faith with other faiths, and to make sure that we're not staying in our own bubble in doing this, but to recognize that. So I don't know if anybody wants to say anything more.
Hi, Robin.
When you're
Oh,
done.
stand up. Okay. Robin, Diana, and I talked about how we really think the Episcopal Church needs to be a prophetic voice in these times, and how proud we are of the things that Bishop Buddy and the head of is it Sean Rowe? I think his messages of being critical of current times, but we also really, and how surprised we are that they're getting hate mail for doing that. But we talked about how the message needs to be what we're for and not what we're against, and that how that is really what the Faith and Democracy group here at St. John's is really aiming for, which is, yeah, the message needs to be one of love. We need to be and I talked about listening recently to a podcast with Arthur Brooks, who I didn't realize was conservative, but he is really trying to talk deeply with politicians about reframing things so that the message is what we are for and that love is the solution. And so we thought that the Episcopal Church really has a role to be a voice for that message.
So our group focused on question number 4, and I hope I'm being faithful to what we talked about here. But you know, we focused on kind of piggybacking on what a lot of people have already said, that you know, church and government are separate in the sense that God's kingdom is so much more than this government, right? And it's so different, so beyond what government is. And in Jesus's time, you know, he lived under an oppressive government, right? But his movement was very countercultural, and it was about love. And so, you know, I think we think that our message as Christians and working within the government is really to perpetuate that message of love. And that means like listening to other people, seeing them in their humanity, even if you disagree with them, and just approaching them with like humility, as someone said, and recognizing their human dignity. even if we think they're really wrong, because that's really what we're called to do as church.
Can I call from someone online, Ginny or Tom or Krista? You had some comments in the chat. You could just unmute yourself.
This is Krista. Sorry, I'm not ready to show my face today, but anyway, we talked about several things, and I'm just going to hit on one of them that I feel one of the important threads, which is that one of the things that John said in the beginning, that his initial idea was to talk about the crisis we're in, and then his son pointed out that it's more of a period of uncertainty, and but I think both may be true, in that I think depending on who you are, you may be experiencing crisis. If you're an undocumented immigrant, if you're a family member or a friend of an undocumented immigrant, one of the people in our discussion talked about feeling that some of her workers were people who helped her manage her home, were at huge risk right now, and that, so it may be impacting them directly in terms of crisis, but they're part of the community. The importance, we're talking about the importance of community. John brought that up. And so members of our community are disappearing from the streets. They're being tortured. They're being sent to countries that it's very suspect what kind of treatment they'll get there. Authoritarian countries too. We have people who are homeless, who are being taken off the streets. We have people who are trans, who are much more fear right now. I mean, I could go on and on. So because those may not be any of us individually, directly us, they are part of the community. And if our community is in crisis, aren't we also in crisis? So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, that I think, John, your instincts were spot on.
Wow. Thank you, Krista. Hey.
Thanks. Our group consisted of Jay, Tara, and myself. The common theme, I think, was, are we just reacting to what is happening around us any day, or are we trying to act? And we ended up with rather different views of action. There is a way in which we at St. John's is a good example. In many aspects of our daily life, we engage, we act on behalf of the community, not just our little church bubble, but the larger community around us. We do it at many levels, in many, many different ways. And that is part of our Christian identity, clearly. Less clear, how do we engage and act in larger situations, such as what is happening at the national level? We had significant disagreements there, because one perspective is to say there's not much we can do to impact the larger sphere. And so let's focus more intentionally on what we know we can do, which is mostly local. There is another argument, which is, no, if there ever was a time when Christians need to engage in the larger picture, now is that time in Western society generally, but especially in the United States. Why? Because many of our fellow Christians, like it or not, have taken up the mantle of prophetic vision. They're telling the rest of us, we know what Christianity is about. We know in what direction our country should be moving. We know what community means. And some of us have difficulty identifying with that prophetic vision. We recognize that it is, in many ways, a prophetic vision. As Christians, we need to discuss and to understand how to react with an alternative prophetic vision.
Thank you. I think our time has come to an end. I want to just hit on several things, and I hope this is not the end of the conversations we have. I think what we started with the bishop last Sunday and today, obviously there is a lot of interest in this, but there are questions about. One of you said love is the solution. I think sometimes we as Christians think that is the answer to everything. When Jesus talked about the scriptures and talked about the love, the word for love in Hebrew is not what we generally think of as an emotional. Love is, the word love in Hebrew is faith, is loyalty. Who are you loyal to? And so in some sense, the question of love is, where is our loyalty? And I think there are so many interesting things here. I hope there is a way of continuing this on for those of you who organize these sort of things. And thank you all for your conversation today.